This week's episode of the ArtTactic Podcast is brought to you by ArtTactic.com, where you can now check out our Contemporary Art Market Confidence Report for 2025. Positive sentiment returns to the art market as our confidence indicator showed improvement this month. You can get 15% off this report and every report on ArtTactic.com by being a loyal podcast listener by using the promo code PODCAST15 at checkout. Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. Later this month, Frieze LA and the Felix Art Fair will take place in Los Angeles. This year, of course, LA faces an unusual challenge in the aftermath of the devastating fires that swept through parts of the region. I'm looking forward to being in LA for the fairs. I've heard some who usually travel in to attend the fairs are skipping out this year. But I think now is the year to attend, as the LA art community needs our presence, whether it's buying art or even just seeing them for some in-person interactions. I think by being there and showing up, it makes a difference. In this week's episode of the podcast, we're joined by Mills Moran, co-founder of Felix Art Fair, which returns to the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel from February 19th through the 23rd. Felix has carved out a unique space in the art fair landscape, offering a more intimate, collector-friendly alternative to traditional large-scale fairs. The fair has really become an essential part of LA's Art Week, running alongside Frieze and bringing some energy to the city's vibrant art scene. We chat with Mills about how the LA art community is recovering, the decision to move forward with Felix despite recent challenges, and why it's more important than ever for visitors to show up and support the city's artists and galleries. We'll also take a look at the evolution of Felix since its early days, the rise of the alternative fair model, and what's in store for this year's edition. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Thanks so much for listening. Mills, thanks so much for joining us.
I appreciate you having me on, Adam. It's been a few years, so it's nice to be back on the podcast with you.
You know, you're absolutely right. And congrats on all the success with Felix. It's really remarkable how far the fair has come along, and really the entire fair week in LA, just how important it is to the art world. It's really remarkable. So I think the best place to start, of course, is if you could, being based in LA, can you share an update with us on how the art community in LA is doing in the aftermath of the fires? How have the galleries, artists, collectors, everyone in the trade really been impacted, and what has the recovery process been like?
Well, it was kind of a crazy start to the year. Obviously, the fire started with January 5th, 6th, or 7th, and the winds were picking up, and then you kind of knew that there was going to be some sort of risk or danger, and then all of a sudden it just literally got very out of control very fast, and there was definitely about 10 days of very raw sort of confusion, indecision. Everybody knows somebody that was impacted, even, a lot of the New York art community or the art community around the country who's friends with people in LA. I mean, you don't have to go very far to know somebody personally or be very close, 1 degree or 2 degrees away from someone who definitely lost a lot in this disaster. And, it was a little bit of a blur for the first 10 days, and nobody knew how to move forward. And, and everybody sort of scattered. Wasn't a common place to be with each other, talk to each other, and everything was sort of, by text message. Some people went to Palm Springs, some people went to San Diego. It was a pretty wild time to be here. But what you did see is just so much support come out of the arts community for people in the arts and arts workers, from artists, art handlers, galleries, assistants, production people, like everything, and everyone in the sort of art supply chain really kind of rallied for each other pretty quickly. Like a week after the fires, there was a town hall meeting that was, I think, attended by something in the neighborhood of 150 to 200 people, which I spoke at, and so did some other art, fair organizers and gallerists. And, we wanted to get a sense for what people were thinking. And then there was a very huge feeling and push to try to establish a sense of normalcy as soon as possible. And I think that's, wasn't absolutely realistic right away, but you could definitely feel like it was realistic 6 weeks out, which is sort of when the fairs were going to be scheduled for. Um, some great organizations, stepped up and supported, and some new organizations were founded to help people in the recovery process. And it's been incredibly deeply touching to see how this community has really banded together, and people from all walks of the art world, whether they're in Europe or New York. People, I think, being away from the city was harder for some people because the CNN and the news broadcast really just showed the horrific parts of what fires can do to homes and to communities. And it was almost easier to be here because there was almost an immediate sense of normalcy less than 2 weeks after, especially if you're in Hollywood, like outside of the air quality, which was a big problem at first. Everybody was at work and everybody was going back to 2 weeks in, there was openings and people were attending openings. And I think it's important to acknowledge what happened and to help people that needed help and to support in any way you could. But I also think it's important to get back to normal just for everybody's sanity. And that's sort of what happened right away. And I do feel like it's a very normal place to be now, especially now that there are no fires. The air quality is much, much better. It rained was it last weekend or the weekend before? And you could really feel the difference right after the first rains came because, you can almost taste in your mouth that the air wasn't right. And so I was very adamant about masking up and wearing a mask, and every public library in the city was giving away masks, and you could just go get an N95. And, they had this sort of pandemic feel all over again where, you didn't really want to go back to wearing masks, but you knew it was the right thing to do. And now it rained again. It's rained again today. It's going to rain the next 2 days, which I think is fantastic. Like I went on a hike this morning in the rain and it was just glorious. It feels like we're getting back to normal, but there is a lot of recovery still ahead. And there's a lot a lot of people that were impacted really are going to have a long road ahead. So we can't be ignorant of that, but we do need to move forward and push as normal as possible to get artists, into have their shows. If they were canceled, they're rescheduled. Artists need to make work. Artists need to sell work. I mean, the whole cycle of the art economy needs to push forward, and I think we're all here for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with Felix and Frieze LA as well scheduled for the later part of February, I imagine there were some type of conversations about whether to hold the fairs as planned or delay them. Can you take us inside that decision-making process for Felix? Was it a difficult choice, or was there really a consensus that it was important to move forward and have the fairs now in February?
Like I said, during the very raw period, you didn't know what was possible, to be quite frank. And it's interesting. I understand your question asking about the internal mechanics of Felix, but this really was a community effort. This is me calling Christine and Frieze, asking her to get on a phone call. This is, Jeffrey Deitch setting up the town hall. This is Kelly Akashi begging everyone to have the fairs move forward, in a speech that literally brought people to tears. This didn't happen just Felix. It wasn't just me, Al, and Dean sitting in a room trying to concoct our what we wanted to get out of this. It was responding to everybody's sort of motivations and feelings and desires. And there was a lot of interconnected, collaborative sort of moments where we were all checking in on each other, but I wanted to hear what people wanted, because to me, this wasn't our decision. If I'd be the first to stand on the hill and say this is a bad idea if I really, really thought it was a bad idea, but I didn't think it was a bad idea. But even with that, I still needed to understand that other people thought that this was the right thing to do. So the community came together in ways that was difficult because, again, we weren't convening together. There was no central place to meet. There wasn't, it was all, phone calls, Zoom calls, town hall meetings that everyone's virtual, text messages. So every idea was discussed. postponing is probably the hardest thing to do because these things take a year to plan. So I don't think postponing was ever a realistic option because it's really, really hard to align everybody's schedules, whether how when Frieze can get their space, when we can get our space. You're also in the middle of LA award season. So doing a 2 week push, 3 weeks, it's just not realistic. And then you start butting up against the other art fair deadlines and calendars, and then it just doesn't make sense. So to me, it was either to cancel or go forward in a way that is the only way that was realistic for me. But I knew what we wanted. I guess to summarize, I knew what we wanted to do. I just wanted to make sure the other people felt the same way.
So I've been going to this week in LA ever since Frieze and Felix were established. To me, it's one of the most exciting fair weeks of the year. It's a great way to see just how far LA has developed as an art scene. And I'm not just speaking about the fair, but you also, of course, have the galleries and the artists who live there and so many great collections that open up during this week. I think also going this year is perhaps the most meaningful out of any of the years because I really do think the art community needs our support. Interestingly, I have spoken to some people who normally travel to LA for the Fair Week, but they're hesitant due to the aftermath of the fires. From your perspective, how does the LA art community feel about visitors coming this year? How important is it for people to come and support really the entire art ecosystem? What message would you like to share with prospective visitors who are contemplating going this year but aren't sure?
Well, everyone that's in LA wants as many people to come as possible. And I think that I could say with absolute certainty. And I want to debunk a couple myths. One, I've heard that people don't want to take people's hotel rooms. Nobody's staying in hotel rooms. Nobody that's displaced is occupying hotel rooms. LA does a weekly published report of hotel occupancy, and it's somewhere around 60%. There's plenty of rooms. And there's plenty of places to stay. The air quality, I already kind of addressed that earlier, but it's in the low 20s right now. The rains have really helped it, and I think it's just really back to normal. It's sort of normal LA air quality. The fires are extinguished. They're fully contained, and they have been. So I think the way travel works now, like we're not in the 70s. You don't have to buy your ticket 4 months out to plan a trip. Everyone can kind of wait and see, and however comfortable they feel, you can buy a ticket in a day or two. It's going to be the same price probably. Hotels are not going to change their rates. If you do a last minute booking, you probably get a better deal. So if people are on the fence, I would suggest do your research, figure out whether you think it's a great time to visit because it's totally normal here, and it's getting out of New York winters is always fun. But I would encourage everyone to come out and just see how normal life feels out here because it really is. Everyone's back to work. Everybody's going to gallery openings. People have rescheduled their shows. They're putting them back on. I mean, it was a tough 10 to 12 day blur, but I think we're past it. We're well past it.
Yeah, and I certainly encourage anyone who's considering visiting LA for the fair to do so. I think it would be really meaningful. So I want to ask you a few questions about Felix's evolution. I remember having you on the podcast the first year you had the fair, and it's just incredible how much the fair has become a staple of LA's Fair Week. It really offers a different energy, a more intimate, hotel-based setting compared to larger conventional fairs. So looking back to its first edition, how much has Felix evolved over the years in your eyes, and what are some of the key ways it has grown?
Well, it's funny. This is going to be our seventh edition, and if you would have asked me after that first podcast if we'd have 7 editions, I probably would have laughed at you because I didn't. I don't think we had a strategy that far out to think that we'd be around this long. Given now that we're at 7 editions, I could totally tell you. Well, I can now see our 10th edition. Also, on the flip side, I can see this continuing because it is kind of important. Not kind of important. I think it is an important part of the arts community here for the Fair Week, and it serves a really good purpose. And there's galleries. What I've really seen evolve is our galleries have gotten mostly younger. I can see how the different energy of the younger galleries has really helped evolve, and I think that's a normal part of not just the art world, but sort of the fair model, especially the one we've established as a sort of as a ancillary fair to a larger fair. I think it makes a lot of sense, and from that sense, and it's just much more about discovery, about discovering artists and galleries, and I think that's a crucial thing. We have about 20, I think it's 21 LA galleries, and there's 64, so that's still another 40 domestic international galleries that some people have never heard of, you know? So I think it's evolved in a way that's really about youth discovery, different kind of energy. We're still very proud of being in a domestic setting, being in an intimate setting when we're discussing art, not being in a convention center, having air, being able to socialize in a non-structured way, whether it's laying out by the pool, walking through the grand lobby, and this hotel is really lends itself to the kind of show that we put on, and being able to quickly be inside of a conversation or quote unquote booth and being within a minute of being outdoors or whatever. I think it gives you a lot of headspace to consider, and it gives you more time there. It provides for more time. You don't feel like you're in such a rush. A lot of times you go to the bigger fairs, you see people staring at maps and then going down aisles and sometimes getting lost. Sometimes, you get so used to the structure of that fair, you have a system. And other times they change the fair layout and you're a little bit confused. We kind of never change our fair layout because you can't really move around a hotel. But at the same time, you're able to see somebody and go have a quick meeting or have a drink, or you can even jump in the pool if you want. I think it's a different environment, and it's a really good complement to the Fair Week.
Yeah, I really enjoy the vibe and the atmosphere at Felix. It's a really nice change of pace from the more conventional art fair. And of course, historically, we have seen art fairs in hotels in the past. We haven't seen too many recently. I think it's really incredible the success that you've had with Felix. I'm wondering if you've noticed a broader appetite for fairs that break away from the traditional format like Felix does. I'm curious, do people come up to you and kind of pick your brain because they're thinking about maybe opening up a fair in a similar style? Or have you contemplated opening up in other locations? And really, do you think we'll continue to see overall more experimentation with the art fair model going forward?
I've seen different, like Basel Social Club, things like that people have been enjoying, and I think are a good complement also to the fair circuit. Things like that we've seen pop up, and we've seen other fairs in the past that had a different model and that somehow didn't work. So yeah, I think anything unique that adds a different sort of value to the overall value proposition of art patrons and art dealers and artists, I think is a good thing. We've definitely been approached. We've definitely walked many spaces in between Europe, New York, other parts of the West Coast. Nothing's really ever seemed to fully capture how we captured whatever we captured at Felix. We haven't been able to see it recreate. We haven't been able to recreate it in a way that we're willing to move forward with, but not to say that we're not against expansion and doing this somewhere else. It really has to hit a lot of the notes. And we've tried to come up with different ideas over the years on how that could work, and haven't really unlocked that Rubik's Cube. But not to say that we wouldn't ever do that. So I think there's a space for this, if that's to answer your question. I think there's room for this in other locations. We just have to figure it out. And I think the art world will be open to it.
And so before we let you go, it'd be great if you can help us preview this year's edition of Felix just a little bit. What can visitors expect at this year's Felix? Are there any notable new exhibitors or programming or changes that you're particularly excited about?
It'll be the same structure. There's 5 galleries that are sharing rooms, which I think is always fun. Rico Maresca, he's joining the fair for the first time. I'm sure you're familiar with his gallery. I'm really excited. But he's sharing a booth with Nicole Bouchain, and they're showing the work of Hideon. I think Rico he's one of my, I just love what he does. I love his program, and I've been trying to get him in the fair for years. So one of the mentions I could give you that I think everyone should kind of go to the booth. And Hideon's work is great. Megan Mulroney has a wonderful booth with a solo booth with Nick Taggart, which is I think going to be really exciting. It's a historical booth with Nick's work. And I love Bridget Mulholland. She's coming from Paris. She's been a great supporter of Felix from day one when she was at Anton Kern. She kind of really pushed to do the fair the first 2 years. Now she opened her own space, and she's coming from Paris, and we're really excited to have her. Yeah, those are some of my highlights.
Mills, thanks so much again for coming onto the podcast and updating us on how everyone's doing in LA, as well as previewing this year's edition of Felix Art Fair. We definitely encourage our listeners to travel to LA for the fairs if they aren't planning to already. And if our listeners want to learn more about this year's edition of the fair, what's the website they can visit?
Well, you can go to felixfair.com. That'll be on our website. If you want to buy tickets, you can go to our Instagram. It's our link in bio. Felix Art Fair is the Instagram. We're also we have a couple special events one with the Hammer and the other with LACMA. They're two separate events, and they're bringing the good group of trustees over on separate days. But beyond that, we have formed alliances with all the museums, as many as we can in the LA area, to give their members discounted tickets. So MoCA, Hammer, LACMA, ICALA, we're providing them as discount code for their membership, so we can really get a large chunk of our community out in full force and really be a supportive place for not just the artists and galleries, but also the city in general.
Great. Thanks so much again, Mills, and I'll see you in a few weeks in LA.
Appreciate it, Adam. Thank you.